This Mercury retrograde only travels 10 degrees back and forth from 16 degrees of Cancer to 26. And that retrograde period takes 25 days. Slow, deep, not in a rush. In this third part of my Mercury retrograde in Cancer series, I walk you through the exact stations, the combust points, and what's different about this retrograde compared to the last time it happened back in 2020. This was recorded inside my Star Powered Circle Masterclass, my global community for changemakers and leaders, and you're welcome to join us. Now, let's get into those key dates of this upcoming Mercury retrograde in Cancer. I'm Leslie Tagorda, a business astrologer and creator of the Astro Brand Method, blending more than 20 years of brand strategy with the precision of astrology to help entrepreneurs and underrepresented leaders make their mark. All right, so let's talk about the astrology of this Mercury in retrograde. The last time we had Mercury retrograde was all the way back in the summer of 2020. Rewind, rewind, rewind. And so in the summer of 2020, what was that was probably the most uncertain times before our current era of uncertainty. This was like the very first opening into uncertainty. Like most of us were in lockdown. This is before we had any of the vaccines. We were wiping things down when like it got delivered. We didn't know how this was happening, like how it was being passed. There was a lot of questions at this time in the summer of 2020. And just remember that the insecurity that we felt, the emotional insecurity of like not knowing what was going on. Um, Ajane, wow, I see something circling back, being closed up for me personally. Yeah. So be like Ajane and like think about like interpersonally, what was happening for you in 2020? Like if you are partnered with a significant other, maybe you are having, like having stress tests of being in like confined spaces for so long. Our relationships got really compressed, right? We might have had a pod that we were hanging out with. I know we had a pod with our family, and just one other family because Rocket was really, really young at that point. And so having a kid at home by yourself, that was really, really challenging. But what's happening now? So back on June 12th, right around 2 days before the Gemini new moon, Mercury moved into the retro shade, and at Cancer of 16 degrees. Melissa says, I was transitioning from my 15-year position into my own evaluation agency over that summer. Ah, and when you spring that up, I'm asking, what did you have to do in terms of feeling secure enough to leave the security of a 15-year position to go into your own agency? Like that would be a place where I would want to look at, because it takes a lot of emotional security and courage to leave a 15-year position and to go out on your own. And that's something to be really proud about. And then next week on Monday, on June 29th, this is when Mercury stations. June 12th, Cancer of 26 degrees. June 29th, Cancer of 16 degrees. And so I want you to notice, right? 26 degrees back to 16 degrees. We'll look at these two numbers down here because that we can do the math. That's only 10 degrees. Now, a typical Mercury retrograde on average can go anywhere it's on average about 15 degrees. It can be as low as 8 degrees and it can be as high as 18 degrees, but it's usually somewhere around the 15-degree, meaning that Mercury is going to transit this area back and forth and back and forth. And so it's only traveling 10 degrees. And usually a Mercury retrograde lasts for 3 weeks. So 3 times 7, 21 days. And this time, this Mercury retrograde is traveling a shorter distance than average, 10 degrees, like a much shorter distance than average, and a whole 4 days longer. So it's going slowly, and with the shadow even longer. Yes, exactly. The whole process takes 6 to 8 weeks, but this one is a very, very, very long process. And so when we have a Mercury retrograde that moves this slowly, we are asked to go deep. And we already mentioned how this particular Mercury retrograde doesn't exist in a silo. It's very integrated with the lunations happening really like in conjunction with the new moons and the full moons, and really aligned with planetary shifts. So Jupiter entering Leo right at the station retrograde, and then aligned with Venus entering Libra at around August 6th when Mercury leaves the shadow zone. So the whole complete process, even though Mercury is retrograding from June 29th through July 23rd, remember that the shadow zones are also part of this process. Yes. So Cassandra said, I'd love to hear more about the shadows pre and post. I know it's not as intense, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Yes. So in the pre-shadow, and I should have put this in here, the pre-shadow phase really shows us it's a foreshadowing. Right. So like when you read a book or when you go to a movie and they foreshadow what's about to happen. Right. So you notice where things might be breaking down, and they're not breaking down just to cause you grief. They're breaking down because this is what you're supposed to be working on. And so, whatever is kicking your butt in the pre shadow is what you're working on during the retrograde period. So, the pre shadow that we're in right now, what pattern around emotional safety or leadership am I starting to notice that needs a second look? What needs more joy in my leadership? Right? Solstice parties showed me I need to be having more parties and bringing more people together in person. Absolutely. Now, when Mercury comes to a complete stop, and one thing to point out, Mercury is the fastest moving planet in our solar system. It goes around the sun 3 times before for every one time that the Earth does. And so even though Mercury is not actually going backwards, it's just an illusion of going backwards, and it's an illusion of Mercury slowing down. Mercury doesn't like to go slow down. It doesn't like to slow down. Okay. It doesn't like to go slow. And it can feel really, really constrained. And so, because it's being forced to slow down, we have to work with this energy, with the intensity of it. It's just like if you're lifting heavy weights, right? You don't want to go fast because you're not actually letting your muscles do the work. You have to go with the intensity and like do your squats up and down really, really slowly to build your muscle. Okay. So on the station retrograde on June 29th, the day that I'm flying to Hawaii, what space can I create to be still long enough to actually feel what's underneath? And how can I use love and joy to guide me? Right. Some of us, no, I'm not calling out names. I'm not calling out myself. Keep busy so we don't feel the things. But this is not one of those days you're going to do that. You're going to intentionally feel the things. And then once Mercury gets in reverse and it starts moving again, this is when things start to ease up. What new information about myself is surfacing that I need to reconsider? How will I now incorporate more love and joy into my leadership? And then the midpoint, right? The midpoint of a Mercury retrograde is when Mercury then meets the sun. When it's coming back towards the sun, that's why I wish I had that chart. It's okay. So when Mercury is retrograding, it's meeting the sun, it's coming back towards the sun, and it's going to meet the sun. And this is just like a full moon phase. Because Mercury never gets more than 30 degrees from the sun, it can't go opposite the sun. And so it comes back to the sun, but it's now like the full moon phase. And in this full moon phase, there's a lot of evaluation, realizations, and downloads. And after the midpoint, things are going to ease up. Now that I've felt it, what's the one true thing I'm ready to say out loud? And so this is for us who've been working on being a little bit more vulnerable in our messaging. What do you really need to say? Right. And then when Mercury stations to now shift into forward gear again, this is your integration time. This is a time where you can start to make a plan on everything that you've learned and take action. Right? What brave action am I ready to take now that Mercury moves forward? And that this is the plan, and now taking action in the post shadow. So with your emotional leadership and action, how will you integrate it? Mercury in gate 62 has been creating divine ajna transit for me. That's been fantastic. I love all my human design folks. I don't really know human design, so I can't comment. All right. So, fun fact, during Mercury retrograde, the reason why we feel it so much, even though Mercury is really close, anytime a planet is in retrograde, it's closest to Earth. As I mentioned earlier, Mercury is never more than 30 degrees away from the sun. Can't get that far. Again, optical illusion from just our perspective. And I always find this super interesting. Mercury spends 19%, that's almost 20% of its orbit in retrograde. So that means that 20% of us have a Mercury retrograde in our natal charts. It's very common. And all that means, Mercury is the ruler of both Gemini and Virgo. Gemini, our logic, Virgo, our integration, our earth, able to do things. That for those of us that have native Mercury retrograde, in order for us to understand, and put in the chat if you have Mercury retrograde, in order for us to understand, we actually have to do things with our body before our logic can understand. Yes, and Key said that she has a Mercury retrograde, and I feel better during a Mercury retrograde. Absolutely, because this is like coming home for you. We already talked about that Mercury is not actually going backwards. It's just an illusion from our perspective here on Earth. I don't have a video example of this time. And this one is only going, focusing on highlighting this one area, this little piece, 10-degree arc of your chart from 16 degrees of Cancer to 26 degrees of Cancer. And it happens 3 times a year, about 3 weeks each. And now this one is 3.5 weeks. And we already talked about the combust or the cazimi. Cassandra says, I've always been curious about launching, inviting people into our offers during this time. I don't have Mercury retrograde, but Mercury is in my 10th house. Cancer starts in the 10th through the 11th. Yeah. And so, a lot of people say do not start things on Mercury retrogrades. I've noticed that you can easily restart things. Like if you've had an offer that you've had before and you want to re-offer it, this would be Mercury retrogrades are really good. I have another astrologer friend, Sherry Moyse, who talks a lot about Mercury cycles for those of us that have like heavy ruled Mercuries. And, these are like 6 kind of week sprints and things like that. I'm going to have her on the podcast to talk more about that because she has a really amazing viewpoint on like launch cycles, working with your kind of power planets. Um, Ajane says Mercury retrograde in Pisces made me realize that. So the last cycle of Mercury retrograde, what can happen when retrogrades in water signs is people are talking about themselves to us and other people don't realize it. That's where most miscommunications I notice we're coming from because we're naturally inclining to look internally, but if we're not accustomed to it, we don't realize. Yeah, I think that brings up just this beautiful point of this Mercury in retrograde in water signs this year, right? Because the next Mercury retrograde that we're going to be having is in Scorpio. And so, what does it mean when we have this, Mercury retrograde in in these water signs? It's asking us to go deeper. It's asking us to get clear with our emotions. It's asking us to relate and connect from this emotional level. So that's wonderful. So thank you again. If this episode, if this podcast has touched your heart, please share it with others. Please leave me a rating and review so we can reach the hearts of even more change makers like you.